going to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make this topic easy for us to cover. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. Start in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we ask him to send his peace and blessings upon our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his companions, upon his family, and upon the believers until the last day. It's a pleasure being here with you all today. Alhamdulillah, we are just a few days away from Ramadan and talking about things. Alhamdulillah, we're talking about matters that are very pertinent to the mindset that we should be undertaking and the state of heart that we should tune our heart into as we approach this blessed month. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to reach this month while we are all safe and healthy. So, brother and sister, today I want to talk about, I was asked to talk about enlivening ourselves through the remembrance of death. Enlivening ourselves through the remembrance of death. I think this is a very pertinent and important topic, probably not often talked about. And that in and of itself is very, kind of interesting and telling, and we'll talk about that a little bit, inshallah. But I think that the relevance of the topic here is, I think, twofold. Number one, we're in the midst of a pandemic, a global pandemic, where we are seeing things that we've never seen before, and we've been living a lifestyle that we've never had to endure before, and we are losing brothers or sisters that are dear to us to the COVID-19 virus, and that in itself is the reality. We are all experiencing it in our different communities. All of you, I'm sure, have had people, either friends or family, or at least someone that you know in the community that unfortunately is being afflicted with this virus, and then there are also some of our brothers who have lost their lives. May Allah have mercy upon all of them. So this is something that's real, and so talking about the remembering of death is very appropriate and very relevant and very important for us at this exact point in time. Secondly, I think this is an important subject because we are soon to be entering the blessed month of Ramadan, and the blessed month of Ramadan is a time when we want to put things in perspective, right? It's a time of deep muhasabah, of taking account of ourselves, of reflecting upon our life, of increasing our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that should cause us to also look deeper within ourselves. And as the famous saying goes, "Man arifa rabbahu arifa nafsa." The one that knows his Lord knows himself. And so, being able to have that sort of reflective quality about ourselves at this time is very important, and reflecting upon the reality of death is a crucial aspect of putting certain life priorities in order, which inshallah will speak to. So I want to start by stating the obvious, and this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم كل نفس ذائقة الموت. Every soul shall taste. That is a reality. That is our end. That is our destination. And so to understand that and to be fully cognizant of that is something that we have to, kind of instill within ourselves, internalize within ourselves. And then our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said in the famous hadith, "Akthiru dhikra hadim al-laddat." He said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, remember often uh, the destroyer of pleasures. And they asked him, وَمَا هَادِمَ اللَّذَّاتِ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ? What is the destroyer of pleasures, Ya Rasulullah? He said, "Al-maut." And so here the command is from the Prophet ﷺ to actually remember that reality, to bring it to the forefront of our consciousness. So engaging in that is a prophetic mandate. And of course, it's something the Prophet ﷺ, he lived in, practiced himself. And so it's an intentional thing. And this is really, really interesting, right? Um, this is an interesting teaching that our Prophet ﷺ conveys to us. And the implications, the ramifications of doing that, of practicing that, engaging that, are many. And the benefits, alhamdulillah, are many. So our beloved Prophet ﷺ, as-Sadiq al-Amin, the one who is trustworthy and truthful, we believe when he tells us to do this particular action that there is going to be a very positive impact on our life. And the reality is that um, that death itself is, as the great scholar Imam al-Qurtubi, he says in his book, the famous book At-Tadhkira. Tadhkira is a very important book, Tadhkira bi Ahwal al-Mawta wa Umur al-Akhirah, one of the most comprehensive books that talk about the reminder of the states of being of those that have died and the different stages of the next life. And in the introduction of this book, he says, فَالْمَوْتُ هُوَ الْمُصِيبَةُ الْعُظْمَى. He says that death is the greatest musibah, is the greatest calamity that will befall us. And he says, in addition to that, that the scholars say the only thing that is a greater calamity than death itself, he says, وَأَعْظَمُ مِنْهُ الْغَفْلَةُ عَنْهُ. He says the only thing that's greater than that is to be heedless of the fact that death is that ultimate calamity. And he says, وَالْإِعْرَاضُ عَنْ ذِكْرِ. And also what's a greater test and trial and calamity than death itself is to turn away from remembering death. So to leave the remembrance of death in and of itself is a bigger calamity than to remember death. And he says, وَقِلَّةُ التَّفَكُّرِ فِيهِ. He says, and to remember it little is also missing the mark. وَتَرْكُ الْعَمَلِ لَهُ. And to leave, the engaging in good deeds for preparation of death is itself a greater calamity than death itself. So these are some of the things that he mentioned, and I think he frames it, subhanAllah, in a very powerful way that really helps us kind of understand, the importance of death. I want to talk to you a little bit about what some of our scholars have said about this benefit of looking at death and the remembering of death, and we'll talk about also what some modern day psychologists say about it as well, which is very, very interesting how these matters actually line up in a way that you wouldn't expect. Even Western psychologists, having studied this phenomenon of remembering death, what some of their conclusions are. This is very interesting. I enjoyed doing the research because we don't need validation for what the Prophet ﷺ says, but when you see empirical evidence and empirical studies and research confirm the powerful life guidance that we are given in the Quran. Alhamdulillah, it's just it's something that may be helpful for some people to further deepen their faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said in the hadith that's related in Bukhari, لا يتمنين أحدكم الموت إما محسنا فلعله أن يزداد خيرا وإما مسيئا فلعله أن يستعتب. He says that none of you should wish for death. None of you should wish for death. In Bukhari, the beginning of the hadith, none of you should wish for death. This is it. I think just pause here for a minute. What's important here is to realize thinking about death and wishing for death are two different things. Thinking about death, contemplating it, not engaging in death, not taking one's own life. Of course, we're talking about thinking about your future reality, my future reality. I'm going to leave this world one day. You're going to leave this world one day. Thinking about that. That's not the same as wishing for it. And so this hadith, he says, none of you should wish for death. And a person will either be a muhsin, and then the Prophet ﷺ tells why the thinking of death is beneficial for all. Because the muhsin, the one who does good, he has the opportunity to increase in doing good before he meets Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the one, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاعْبُدْ رَبَّكَ حَتَّى يَأْتِيَكَ الْيَقِينُ, and worship your Lord. This is a command for the Prophet ﷺ, and the command to him also applies to us. Worship your Lord until you reach the state of yaqeen. The state of yaqeen here means certainty when you reach death, because at death everything becomes clear. As far as everything that we know about the unseen, we will see it with our own eyes in its light. So, so the muhsin, the good doer, the believer, death is good for him, and death is good. Remembering of it, holding it in his mind is important, or in her, in her faculty of thinking. That is an important thing to engage in, because it will increase you good if you are a mu'min. And if you are other than that, if a person is other than that, if they are musi, there's somebody who engages in, in the evil deeds, they're far from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then thinking about death will be an opportunity for them to come back to Allah. So the remembrance of death is good for all, right? That's something, a beautiful thing where the Prophet ﷺ, he puts it in perspective to us as relates to everybody. The benefit is for everyone. I want to talk a little bit about, what some of our scholars of old have said as it relates to the remembrance of death. And so we read, for example, where before that we talk a little bit about what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said before we move to their sayings. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says in the hadith related by Ibn Majah, he's asked, فَأَيُّ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَكْيَسْ, which one of the believers is most clever, is most cunning and most wise in terms of how they plan? The Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, أَكْثَرُهُمْ لِلْمَوْتِ ذِكْرًا وَأَحْسَنُهُمْ لِمَا بَعْدَهُ إِسْتِعْدَادًا أُولَٰئِكَ الْأَكْيَاسِ. He says, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the one that is most clever are those that remember death. SubhanAllah. So you want to be in that category of people that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he counted as people who are clever, who know how to plan out affairs. Then remember death. Remember it often. And he says, and those that are best in preparing for what comes after death. So those that are wisest, those that are smartest, are those that remember death often, and those that busy themselves with preparing for what comes after death, but of course the life worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, worship in the comprehensive sense of the word, in the comprehensive sense of the word. And the Prophet ﷺ, he continues in another hadith related by Tirmidhi, and he defines the word al-kayyis. Who is al-kayyis? Who is this cunning and this wise person? He says, al-kayyisu man dana nafsah wa amila lima ba'da al-maut. He says, the clever one is the one who takes account of himself or herself. The clever person is the one who takes account of themselves, and they work for that which is going to come after death. And he says, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَالْعَاجِزُ مَنْ أَتْبَعَ نَفْسَهُ هَوَاهُ فَتَمَنَّى عَلَى اللَّهِ. And the ajiz, the opposite, the one who falls short in doing good, the one who is who doesn't think about death, who doesn't plan for the future, who doesn't look to what the ultimate reality is. He says that person will just follow their heart. That they will follow their base desires, and because they're not concerned about the ultimate reality and the ultimate accountability, and then they will do this, have this sort of wishful thinking attitude with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is Ghafoor, Allah is Rahim, Allah will forgive me, but if you don't think about death and you don't think about that reality, of course Allah is Ghafoor, of course Allah is Rahim, but that has to also lead to a modification in your thinking and then ultimately in your action. One of the the ayahs that we're all very familiar with in the beginning of Surah Al-Mulk, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز. Right. The second ayah where Allah says, the one who has created death and life, so that he may try you to see which one of you is best in deed. Talking about Allah. One of the great mufassirin, he said that this ayah means أي أكثركم للموت ذكرا, the one that is best indeed is the one who actually thinks about death the most. So I thought, subhanAllah, when you think about that, it frames the way we look at this issue, and subhanAllah, something that we need to kind of adjust our thinking towards. The scholars of old, this was their practice. The scholars of old and the righteous people in our history today, this was their practice. They acted on this prophetic injunction of our Prophet ﷺ, where they would actively engage in thinking about death. And so the Khulafa, al-Khalifa al-Rashid al-Thabis, the fifth rightly guided Khalifa. Of course, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he was known as the righteous Khalifa, but there was a gap between him and Sayyidina Ali. He used to gather, part of what made him this righteous person who still lived a simple lifestyle and who engaged in the same sort of lifestyle that the first four Khalifas did, was because of the fact what he used to do. He used to gather the scholars around him, and he would have a special gathering, the purpose of which was for nothing but to remind each other of death. Nothing but to remind each other of death. So perhaps it's not stated explicitly how they did that, but perhaps they reminded each other of what the next life is going to look out like, what the Prophet ﷺ, he said in this regard, and so forth. And so they used to remind each other of death, of the Qiyamah, of the last day, and then they would cry as if, and you would think that they were at a janazah. You would think that they were at the funeral of somebody who had just passed that was very close to them. That's how heavy um, you know, their emotional reaction was to that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to, to embody that type of practices in our life, and Allah put righteous people in our lives that will remind us, that will help remind us of death, and not and turn us from the lifestyles where we do anything but remember death. We engage sometimes in an overload of entertainment and things just to make us laugh, um, just to make us distracted, just to make us preoccupied with some sensual pleasures, whether even if those are just visual, right? Watching things constantly that cause ubiquitous. The great scholar Sufyan al-Thawri, rahimahullah ta'ala, who was one of the great fuqaha of our in our legacy, in our history. When death was mentioned to him, or he would remember death. The Imam al-Qurtubi, he says, لا ينتفع به أياما. He was a faqih who everybody would turn to for, to answer all of their questions, to know how to live their life according to Islam and understand fiqh and so forth. But they would not benefit from him for a number of days after death, after he would engage with thinking about death. فإن سئل عن شيء, and if he was asked about something, he said, لا أدري, لا أدري. In other words, he was so overwhelmed emotionally thinking about death that he couldn't function in his life. He wasn't able to be alert and conscious, and his thought process wasn't clear because he was flooded with emotions. So this was the way of our righteous before us. And it's important that we reclaim that and we engage in that in our life. What are some of the practices by which we can remember death? Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told us in the famous hadith, فَزُورُوا الْقُبُورِ فَإِنَّهَا تُذَكِّرُ الْمَوْتِ. He says, and visit the graves because they remind you. Visit the graves because they remind you. So that is the state of mind we should have when we go to the graveyard. We are not only remembering the person that has passed. Oftentimes we go to a funeral. We didn't have a very strong relationship with the deceased, but we go there and we're supposed to contemplate that reality. It often saddens me, but when I do go to the graveyard, because somebody passed, and you see brothers laughing and just taking it easy. People haven't seen each other a long time, and they gather, but they forget what they're there for, right? We forget what we're there for, and the ultimate benefit comes when we're there in that reality, and we contemplate that that's going to be us, that's going to be our future existence, and so to take, we have to bring that to our full to the forefront of our mind. So visiting the graves, to find brothers and sisters that will remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that will help you remind each other about the ultimate reality of death, and then to sit alone. And from time to time, sit and think about, remember Do it often. What is that going to look like? Am I ready? What do I need to do? What things do I need to fix? How, what adjustments do I need to make in my lifestyle? To get my will ready. I need to do this and I need to do that. When you engage in the fact that tomorrow you are going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for sure, um, then that will have a very important, it should trigger a full series of thoughts and then actions in your life. And the only way that can be maximized is when you do it often, right? Because we always have fleeting thoughts that come into our mind and then go out. I need to fix this, I need to fix that, I need to do this, I need to do that. But if we don't keep that at the forefront of our mind, or we don't pen them down, or we don't plan them out, we're not even thinking. So those are some things that, from the perspective of our deen, in terms of remembering death and some of the benefits that are attached there. I want to talk a little bit, I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about what modern day psychologists and studies have said about the benefits of remembering death. And I'll keep this brief, and then, we need some time for questions and answers as well. It's interesting. This was really, subhanAllah, interesting to me, that even there have been numerous studies that have been conducted, and they have found these results as a result of asking people to remember death. So they call it death awareness, right? Death awareness. And so there have been studies that have been done, and they ask people to think about death, and they have a certain method in which they have them do it. And in one study, they found that thinking about death. So here are some practical benefits, right? In one study, they found that it will actually make you healthier. Thinking about death can actually make you healthier. It's almost counterintuitive. When you tell somebody, if you're just to tell somebody, well, remember death, think about death. You say, well, that's scary. How can we do that, right? But our Prophet ﷺ told us to do that, and not only is not scary, but it has all of these beautiful, positive, practical impacts in our life. It will make you healthier. How? Because conscious thoughts of death can spark greater fitness and exercise intention, as this one study found. In other words, you're going to be more prone to, like, man, I need to get in shape and I need to take care of myself, right? In another study, women who were death aware, right, who now experience death awareness, they were much more likely to go get a breast cancer examination about their health. In some other studies, they found that thinking about death, being death aware, will actually make you happier. Allah will actually make you happier. And how does that happen? How does it make you happy? Well, they found that what they had people do is they had people write about it, journal about death, and another very aversive topic for each day for 1 week. Write down in a book about your thoughts about death and journal that down and so forth. So what the result was, they found that when people did that, they reported lower levels of depression, increased positive mood, increased self-esteem, and increased intrinsic motivation. Which is very, very interesting, right? Somebody who thinks about death, and they come out with all of these positives, right? Because what happens? This is not even in the context of Iman, right? This is not even necessarily, these are not Muslim studies. These are studies of, we don't know, I don't have the details in front of me as to who the participants were, but these are not studies conducted by Muslims for Muslims. This is in a secular, you know, setting or secular sort of structure around it. We have all of these understandings about what actually happens after death, and even more reason why we feel we need to be accountable. And knowing that we're going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is for certain, for sure, knowing without doubt there is Jannah and there is Jahannam. But these studies were done without even all of that construct, and they still found that people have lower levels of depression. Like I said, increased positive mood, increased self-esteem. SubhanAllah, look at the wisdom behind the words of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. أَكْثِرُوا ذِكْرَ هَادِمِ اللَّذَّةِ. Remember often the destroyer of pleasures, remember death often. Another thing that they found in these studies is that as a result of engaging in death awareness, people tended to care more about others. You know, there was increased capacity to forgive people, and you know, you didn't want to get into it with people, because if you're going to ultimately leave this world, why are you going to get into petty stuff with people? And then there's so much more, you know, other benefits. For example, thinking about death forces you to live in the present. It forces me to be engaged in the here and now, because tomorrow I'm going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so I better do what I do right now and do it with a clear intention and do what I need to do with the best of my ability. If I'm not going to be here, I know I'm leaving this world, well then it's going to put me more focused on my immediate reality. Also, as we said, you know, it like I said, it helps people be good to others, people in your own family, and then even to strangers. You don't have the time to get angry. You don't, you know, want to get into it with petty stuff with people, because there is something bigger looming on the horizon. So, also engaging in the remembrance of death will help you to drop bad habits, because tomorrow I'm going to be held accountable for this, and I don't want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when I'm engaged in God knows what, engaged in watching pornography, in you know, whatever bad habits that we have. We all have our negative qualities, in lying, in watching things, looking at things that we shouldn't be looking at, in terms of listening to music that's displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of its content, or whatever it may be, right? It will help you to drop your bad habits because of that impending reality that's right in front of you. This one is really interesting, and I'll stop on this, and I'll let you take over, and if you have it, if you know, help facilitate questions and answers. Thinking about death takes stress away. This one is, Allah, very, very interesting to me. As paradoxical as it may sound, thinking about death reduces your stress level. How does that happen? How is that possible? We live in a world where we have these bursts of stress, right, throughout our life. We wake up in the morning, we got to get to work. Many of us are working from home these days, but also at the same time, that can be very stressful for many people who are now at home and maybe not working. Or working at home of itself is a stressful experience because of being surrounded with family and kids and so on and so forth. But so that's a stressful time. Being at work, doing work, coming back home. Sometimes there's family drama, and that can be stressful. All of these stress points in our life. But what happens when you engage in this process of the Western psychologists call it death awareness, as we call it remembering death. What happens? You realize that ultimately these are small matters when compared to the large looming reality that's there sitting over you. You're going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That uh, death, which is the equalizer between all people, is going to hit me. And these stresses that I'm going through really are nothing compared to the great um, the fact that I'm going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fact that I'm going to be held accountable, the fact that the angels are going to question me in my grave, and the fact that I'm going to be raised up after that to Allah, and that I'm going to be taken account for, and I hope my good deeds outweigh my bad deeds, and I hope I'm able to cross the sirat over hellfire, the bridge that's over hell, to be able to get to the other side and make it to the gates of Jannah. I'm hoping all of these things. And if I remember, so if I remember death and I remember what's coming after death, then inshallah ta'ala will help me get over these stresses, helps put everything. So I'll stop there and see if you would let us know if you have any like this conversation a little bit further.
Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh Suhail. Really a wonderful lecture on I think this topic that we don't usually talk about because it's a very some people feel it's very morbid, or death awareness is definitely not the thing that I think a lot of people think of when it comes to this. But as you demonstrated, I think there's a lot of benefit in this, not only from a spiritual and religious rectification, but also, as you could see from the research, there's a lot of benefit there too.
That part was really interesting,
Yeah, subhanAllah, it is. And I think, mashallah, that's, I think as Muslims, we need to sort of own that, and not be afraid of being death aware, at least in our lives. Before we end, we actually have one question that I think this attendee wanted to answer for you to answer. The question is, what do you do when you feel like no matter how many good deeds you do, it is not good enough for Allah, because you feel as if you need to do it even more, so that there's constantly, like, there's almost no satisfaction in the amount of good deeds that you're doing. What can someone do in that case?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that brings up a bigger subject too. That is, there's actually there is a limit or a level that some people um, uh, have that does not allow them to engage in thinking about death in a healthy way. So, I want to, thinking about death in general is healthy. It's beneficial, and there's all of these multiple benefits that we talked about. But there is a physiological level that some people, when they do that, they can't engage, and they're whether that may mean they have a physical or emotional sort of overreaction and they can't process. There's actually a term, I forgot what it's called. Process doing discussion. Um, uh, Perhaps somebody else knows the term, but you can look it up. Fear of engaging in thinking of death, and so it's a clinical, psychological ailment, so to speak, disorder. And so the way you deal with that, as this psychologists recommend, is through exposure therapy, as a guided um, method of exposing the person that's afraid of a particular thing, exposing them to that thing in a way that's regulated and monitored, and slowly over the course of time, where they're able to get over that. So perhaps, that is a reality that needs to be considered with some people. If there is some sort of adverse reaction when you do engage in this thought. As far as this particular question is concerned, um, never feeling satisfied with doing good Um, I without knowing more details, it's hard to give a explanatory answer. But I would say that perhaps there is some sort of self uh, deprecation or self a beating up of yourself that's going on based upon certain over expectations of yourself, and that perhaps is related to past trauma in terms of never uh, loved ones in somebody's life, never allowing them to feel that they were good enough, and then that's something that you carried on and carried with yourself. Perhaps that's something that is there. That is something that does happen with some people that never satisfied with the good that they do because they never received that love themselves from those that were supposed to. So, it is a condition that carries if that is in fact the case, perhaps
Barakallahu feek. Yes, that I think, inshallah, would hopefully answer the attendee's question. Um, I will now, maybe if we can end here. I just want to quickly say, Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh Suhail, for your time, really giving us a lot of this beautiful, beneficial knowledge, and I pray to Allah that this is beneficial for all of us, especially given this very unprecedented time with this pandemic. Before we shift to Dr. Rani Awad, I just want to
and I can
remind
go
them.
ahead. I can go ahead and with that. That's okay, Farhad.
Of course,
And just about I wanted to ensure being the director of the offices in Los Angeles, the Filius of Los Angeles. I did want to let people know that of course the newsletter is available to the community. We do have at this point in time because we are probably none of the offices, none of the 8 or 9 offices that we have are seeing even in person because of the pandemic, because of the crisis that we're in. We do offer web therapy. We do offer, we do have the ability to see people through your computer screen or your phone screen, and many people are benefiting from that service. And at this particular time, we have different groups that have formulated depression and anxiety groups because those levels have increased amongst some community members. So there are the support groups there to help people do that in this particular time. And we have these different platforms where we're just ensuring that people are we're getting positive messages through some of the YouTube videos that has recorded. Of course, we work in a very particular niche where we're able to speak to people based upon their psychological slash spiritual needs in a way that speaks to the heart of Muslims. And so just know that we are here for you on these multiple levels, on these multiple platforms. We have an upline as well. All of the information is there on your screen. At the same time, we do want to just remind and encourage folks, especially in the light of the fact that Ramadan in the Masajid is going to be by and large non-existent this Ramadan, perhaps the whole month. We ask Allah to open the doors of the Masajid soon. But Ramadan is an important fundraising month for us at Khalil Center. The sadaqah and the zakat that you give goes to very, very important services to individuals in need. So please, zakat that we dispense through those donations that you give, it goes very specifically to those that are zakat qualified. Um, and the sadaqah that you give, that is also utilized in a way to bolster our services. So please keep that in mind as we come into this blessed month. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala